Thank you, Sujata, so much for being part of my vlog. I would just like to dig right in and get on with the conversation about what's going on with the situation of domestic workers, especially at the time of COVID-19. How are they coping financially? What's going on?
I would begin by saying that the lockdown, which was announced by the Prime Minister, was all of a sudden. On 25th, 24th of March, they were just suddenly caught unawares. That's everyone was suddenly finding themselves not able to go out of the house, and they had a fait accompli that there's some kind of a big illness or pandemic, and it's dangerous to go out. And I would say that's how it began for them. They were not sure what was the situation, and it was the end of the month. So, for all workers, especially low paid workers, the end of the month is a very tough period. They normally don't even have that little bit of cash which they would have at the beginning. So, I can say that most of the workers were reporting that they did not have rations, they did not have cash in hand, and that they had no way of finding out where they could get these rations. So, this is what we started to get as information. It was very scary since we do have a kind of a study we did last year in which we found that about 20% of the domestic workers are actually single women. And in general, our survey showed that in the age group of like 20 on till about 45, 50, the domestic workers actually have only, part support from their spouse, or, about like 30, 40% support from their husbands, and some don't have at all. So, what immediately my mind went to how are they going to manage and how is food going to be there? And one of our domestic worker activists who lives in Perambakam, she told me the situation is very grim and I don't know how we are going to manage. And so I said, how do I tell the outside world what you're telling me? I believe you. So she took her little box camera and and took small videos of the women around her apartment block, and I could see that there's not much rice in any of their kitchens, that they were just cooking barely some rice and they had some few tomatoes and something like that, and some didn't even have that, and so they were really in a desperate situation, everyone thinking that we're just saving everything that we have, the little rice, and stretching it. So it was a very, very, very tough situation. As the lockdown continued, things did not get better because they realized that the men who are mostly either weekly wage earners or who get a wage erratically as casual workers, these are the people whose wives actually do domestic work. And so, the men also are not earning. And so these are the kind of things where I feel that there was not clear recognition that women who work for others in other homes actually need support at this time. On one hand, we see a middle class which is preparing itself for, COVID-19, taking precautions, being concerned about their health and, eating well and exercising and doing breathing exercises. And on the other, we're seeing people whose little children don't even have basic food on their plate. So this is something which is, quite astounding. I mean, for a country which is saying that we are one of the very liberal economies, we are growing, we are a liberal country which sort of has a democracy. So I was a bit upset at that time, being, a leader of a union, and our members in this situation, and we are sitting helplessly.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that immediate shock sort of tapered off when people figured that this is going to remain like this for a while. And slowly people started getting things in perspective. And I realized that some families, even though there was a strict lockdown and people were forbidden from traveling and everything, some families managed to provide the salary to the domestic workers for a few months, and after a point, because they realized that they just can't keep giving free salary, they stopped doing that. So, what came across as a good deed in the first few months, considering that it seems like this is going to go for a long haul, people sort of decided against it. And now, of course, now the lockdown has been eased out a little bit, so things are a bit better. But in the initial stages, that must have been um, pretty difficult to deal with when you know that suddenly you can't go to work, and to whatever little generosity the house owners had, the people that your employers had is now gone.
Yes. So actually, I would say about 60% of the employers were actually supporting their domestic workers for the first 2 months. It gradually came down, and many of the domestic workers said, but our employers also don't have jobs, and our employers are now working from home. And we are not sure whether they will ever employ us again. And this is by June or July, this is the kind of situation. So there are two types of, issues which the women workers were raising. One is the behavior of the resident welfare associations, which were treating them literally like outcasts, where their Aadhaar card would be taken, and it would, if it showed a specific address and that area was a sort of a hotbed of COVID-19, even if wasn't, but since it's a slum location, people start to think that it's not safe. So people actually, in many buildings, they started to hire domestic workers from other neighborhoods. And we found that in some of the neighborhoods which are constructed basically by the Tamil Nadu Slum Clearance Board for as relocation sites, workers were losing their jobs. The resident welfare associations have not actually responded to anything. And I think also the government is partly responsible for this, because throughout the pandemic, it did not actually give any guidelines to house owners or families how they should run their homes. And there was not much of a discussion, though women's work is so important for everyday living. Nobody discussed how women are actually being overworked, how the elderly are being taken care of, how those who have people who are sick or disabled or small children are managing with their work, or even those who are single parents and managing to do work from home. How are they managing? So I think it's a issue which goes beyond only the issue of domestic workers, but I think it's a work, women's work, and therefore quite invisible.
You brought up a very, very important aspect, and it's kind of heartening to know that the domestic workers themselves understand that their employers are also out of their jobs. So they kind of believe that these are the circumstances under which they are now being laid off. And while this may be the circumstances of our times right now, how do we find a middle ground in this, Sujata? How do we, it's not right, we can't just lay off people and just sit smug and wait for the pandemic to pass. What kind of government intervention, what kind of people intervention can be employed in a way that we can cut our losses at least to a certain extent?
One of the things that I feel immediately is having safe transport, because actually people require domestic workers. One of the reasons why they don't want to hire them is that they are not sure whether they're traveling in public spaces or meeting people outside. Well, I visited a friend recently after the lockdown was lifted, and we were a bit withdrawn ourselves. We have not seen each other. And she told me, Sujata, my driver and my maid are my mainstay. My driver goes and picks up my maid every day and drops her. She lives in Tiruvanmayur. Her maid lives in Katangalattur. But they're so attached to each other because they've been there 20 years. She can't do without her. And she's well to do, so she has a car and driver for a maid. Now, imagine this is not going to be possible for everyone at all. And with the government withdrawing public transport, and I would say very, very irresponsibly, they withdrew it all of a sudden, then they bring it back all of a sudden. They don't actually educate people how to use public transport with social distancing. They keep on blaming the public for breaking social distancing norms, but in public spaces, we don't know. So the newspapers carry these big pictures of crowds in these streets or in a fish market or wherever, but they do not actually say you could do it like this. So the disaster management team or the Corporation of Chennai have a big role to play in building and facilitating safe modes of public travel. I would say that's the first thing that they should do. They should work with, residents' associations. They should work with women's groups like ours. They should work with the domestic workers themselves, wherever it is possible, small buses could be used. You don't need those large, big buses. Supposing, let us say, from place A to place B, there are only 20 or 30 workers. You could have a small bus which, works, and or you could have shuttle services. So you know that these workers are safe.
I myself watched and heard some of the domestic workers, the women say that their primary concern has been transportation because even if they want to make sure that they are not susceptible to catching corona, so they're ending up spending more money by taking an auto rickshaw, which might basically be their entire day's income of any given day. So it has sort of burdened them more than alleviating them of all these other stress so that they can peacefully go and come back to work. In this situation, Sujata, I would like to understand about your organization, about the Union of Domestic Workers, the Pen Thorilalargal Sangam. Could you talk a bit about that in a way not limited to the corona times, because of course the organization has been running for a while. Please just take us through the organization and its work so far.
So, Pentolala Sangam is about 20 years old. And though we have been organizing domestic workers for a much shorter period, say from about, the early 2000s. So what we basically have been campaigning and lobbying for is a standardized wage for all, which is based on an hourly rate. The second thing that we've been saying is that there should be a weekly day off. A lot of employers don't understand it, but it can help to improve the efficiency and even the well-being of the workers. The third thing we said is that wages alone, monthly wages alone, is not adequate. So give the worker a annual bonus as 1 day's salary. These are basically our three simple campaign points. The fourth was an appeal made to the government much before the pandemic, give women domestic workers a free or a subsidized bus pass or a travel pass. And this has been going on for the last maybe 8, 10 years, but the government does not really listen to these things. So, because we don't think that it is possible for part time paid domestic workers to actually get that kind of support from their employers, because they work for multiple employers and their travel costs can be very high. One of our studies showed that women are traveling for something like 1.5 hours a day. They're spending between 1,000 and 1,500 as bus fare and whatever, share auto and this and that. And we also found that these women were, not being able to reach in time. They often get late. They don't have that kind of money. So, these were kind of our little bits of experience that we had. And in some places, government did respond by increasing the number of buses, but they've never thought of the a broader issue of making buses cheaper for the informal unorganized sector women workers. The other thing is Pentulala Sangam works on community lines. So what we normally do is we energize a group of workers within a particular locality and expect them to sit together, to educate themselves, to learn about the labor laws, and to also what we call the ILO Domestic Workers Convention 189. What are the norms and rules in that? While we do that, we also trying to show what can be formalization of work or decent work. So try to measure the time that you're working. Try to be precise about what are the tasks you're doing. Look at it as a job. Look at it as something that very specific. Do not just keep doing things in a very vague way. Now, that's also trying to formalize their own idea of work, because sometimes a domestic worker says, I'm just there, I do keep on doing, I don't realize the time. Because you have to move to another job. You have to also go home, and there again you have to work. So and domestic work is unending. You know it, and I know it. If I live in the house, I keep finding more and more work. So this is something that we have been training domestic workers. In fact, I can show you. We have a kind of a nice little manual like this. Domestic workers, it's work and life. So we go over this manual with them over, let's say, about 2 months, every week. And you won't believe they actually start to come on their own at that fixed time on a particular day. So our effort is that making them far more responsible about their work, recognize their work, respect the work that they do, call themselves workers and domestic workers, and in a way define themselves so that they understand who they are, who the employer is. These are some of the things that we have learned just working with them. And I think we have done a good job wherever we are. I think we have managed to ensure that domestic workers have a little better life. And also, we have found that employers normally actually appreciate them. One of our active leaders, she had to come for a meeting on a particular day. And she had taken leave just the week before, and she was desperate. I have to go for this meeting. It's in Egmore. She lives in Perumbakam. And she was very worried, and she kept telling her employer, I'm very sick and I need to go to a doctor. So the employer was saying, no, don't worry, I'll give you this money, go and see this doctor and come back. And she could not find good reason. Finally the employer told her, listen, tell me the truth, what's the trick? Why is it that you need this day off? Because she's very responsible otherwise. Then she explained, ma'am, I have a union meeting. Is that it? Okay. Now you come here, finish your work, and I will book you a cab. She booked her an Ola from Perumbakam to Egmore. Domestic workers and unions are not opposed to employers. Recently, I had a discussion with a friend, a journalist, and she said, we are very scared of unions. I said, but why? I mean, she's talking to me. Uh, no, they always create problems, raise the wages, and, this, that. And I said, see, if we are asking for an increase in payment, we will also ensure that the worker is little healthier, better dressed, better behaved, cleaner, better, little more rested, so more efficient. Like, I know from my own experience, if I see my domestic worker, Mary, looking like she's pulling her leg along, very tired, I just tell her, just take a day off. Now she's been with me for 15 years. So anyway, she gets a weekly off. And I find that now she's working, instead of working for 6 days, she sometimes works only 5 days a week. But I would rather have her 5 days a week than have a sick Mary. We are living in a capitalist society, but this particular relationship between the domestic worker and the employer has to be mediated to the advantage of both of them, so that they are able to sustain that relationship with respect and dignity for both.
And in circumstances where there are all these women that are part of the union now, how are they able to benefit? Are you trying to come up with a scheme where there is a PF, for example?
In Tamil Nadu, we have a labor welfare board for domestic workers. The women are, through our union, do get registered. But we have been able to reach out to a very few people, like let's say about 6 or 7,000, and now during the pandemic, maybe another 5,000. But if you look at the greater Chennai and its population, we are only touching on a very small portion. But when the pandemic started, lockdown started, we immediately appealed to the government of Tamil Nadu and the Labour Welfare Board that they should be paid a subsistence allowance during this period of at least 5,000 rupees per month till such time as the lockdown is withdrawn. Because it's not like they alone don't have jobs, their husbands also don't have jobs. The government was very reticent and it didn't do anything much, but I think some of the domestic workers actually got paid about 2,000 rupees per person, those who were registered. But then the government is very careless, I would say, or it is short of funds, or it is basically does not apply its mind. Those women on the Labor Welfare Board who were receiving a pension, those who are over 60, their pension funds were paid during this pandemic period. So from December, January, they have not been paid. And then, this required so much campaigning and lobbying with them, and they required to waive the need for a pension certificate, to say you're alive and so on. Now, this is what we expect, that employers, government, and workers should be on the same plane. That obviously, on their low salary, workers cannot contribute much to their social security. And the government must sit with employers and trade unions to ensure proper social security in times of this kind of crisis like this pandemic, but naturally in all other situations. It could be a child falling sick, or it could be the woman herself had an accident. So or that, there's certain kinds of occupational problems which domestic workers suffer. And so these are ways in which these labor welfare boards could be used creatively to create a kind of a fund to assist workers during difficulty and crisis. And this structure exists, but it does not have a fund. It does not have a means of, it has not defined how it will collect these resources. Actually, this Labor Welfare Board came in 94 because construction workers were campaigning on this. And the construction workers said that a cess must be levied on every construction from the, and they had successfully created a fund as a result, hmm, which goes into thousands and thousands of crores of rupees today. Now, how do we do something similar for domestic workers is the big question. And this is where we need to put all our minds and hearts together.
And you also mentioned about your reach in Chennai as a city. There are only so many workers that you can reach out to who will be willing to be part of the union. In that sense, how can ordinary people help by registering their domestic worker to the union?
We are working on a app which will help us to register domestic workers very quickly. At present, our process is very long. We have to we sit with them, we convince them. Only if they are convinced, they will join our union and pay a subscription. We have a subscription fee annually. We have a protocol that you will have to meet at least, like, say, once a month, or if not possible, once in 2 months, so that you're able to, connect, you're able to support each other. And in this pandemic, people have been able to help out each other. I mean, this Karpagam, one of the domestic worker leaders that we have, she actually, during the pandemic, she was like, collecting rice from who had it and giving it to those who didn't. Whatever little money she got paid throughout the pandemic lockdown, and she used some of her money. She said, others didn't even have vegetables, so I just quickly went and bought the vegetables and kept them so each one could take. So, you know, the kind of empathy that comes through working with each other, that's very important. So we don't say the unions are only there to, raise wages, but we're talking of transport, we're talking of healthcare, we're talking of childcare, we're talking of many things. And that distinguishes Pentula Sangam from traditional trade unions, where we look at the kind of, it's a woman's work as well as her life. We would like the workers' union to be formed in the community where that domestic worker lives.
Mm.
It is not possible for us to monitor them individually. So even the labor welfare schemes will not become, reachable to them unless they work as a team and as a group. So actually, we don't register them individually. Wherever there are a minimum of 25 or 30 domestic workers, they may be able to register. If, for instance, there is let's say, a resident welfare association, that resident welfare association could tell us, and we can come with our, laptops and all that and register them. And give them an identity card and register them on the welfare board. Uh, the other way is also where they work in individual houses, or in, we can try and form a association in that community. So even if you can identify one or two women who would like to become union members, then with their help, we can identify the community around them. Because these are basically part-time paid domestic workers, and they have the same issues. Actually, the issues are not located within their home or the home of the employer. It's often so many other extraneous issues. One of the things I found about house help was they can't reach in time. This is often a complaint by employers. So I found that they don't have actually water facility in their community, and they're so dependent on that. So I'm talking of one, like almost every neighborhood we've worked in. So this was Perungudi, and it's a Kalakote, and they didn't have any water facility. So it was our immediate effort was, okay, all of you get together and let's put down a petition, go to the panchayat office, go to the corporation, give a petition. Today, for every 20 homes, they have a syntax tank. And, there's a system where the government comes to fill it. They have a system whereby one of the children is responsible to ensure everyone has got water equally. The union is also creating a better quality of life for these domestic workers in their own communities, which no employer or government can do independently. And that's why we keep on insisting that having branch level unions is very, very important. So every area where there are about 40, 50 domestic workers, they should come together as a branch. They should learn to support each other. It also stops criminalization. It also stops the fear of the other for the employer. The employer always worried, do I know the person who's working for me? It's the community which actually gives all of us protection, whether it's the domestic worker or the employer. And this is where I think I'm an old Chennai person. So we have lived in neighborhoods where domestic workers and upper class homes, the slum tenements and the upper class homes or the slums were all kind of intermeshed. It's not like those kind of Delhi kind of places where the jhopris are some 30 kilometers away. So, or you have these gated communities where the poor are living out. We are talking of women who have aspiration. We're talking of women who actually are committed. You also will realize that they're learning from us. We are also learning from them. There has to be a connect. It cannot be like we are battling and warring with each other.
During the pandemic, like you sort of briefly mentioned earlier, there was some form of discrimination based on a certain locality a person was coming from, owing to real or imaginary um, information that a certain place could be more susceptible, more prone for positive cases. Now, at the face of it, it seems like a preventive measure. But we know, based on history, based on experiences, we're also an extremely casteist society. The areas that are seemingly being ghettoized are also areas in which people belonging to the oppressed communities live. I know this warrants an entire vlog in itself, but could you just sort of share your experience?
Actually, Swarna Rajgopal of Prajna, she said it very nicely. She said, Sujata, we are not talking of someone else who is being prejudiced. Even us who have been generally liberal are looking at suspiciously, that prejudice is coming in within us. So I would say we are a very prejudiced society, individually, collectively, in every way. And we communicate this quite in a very inesthetic, ugly way. Or it is very visible. It's like a child. A child can read your mind. Can't the child read your mind? Domestic workers read the employer's minds too. So I think we need to have a frank discussion. Yes, we are afraid. We are afraid of getting coronavirus. We don't think your area is clean. This is again where a dialogue is absolutely necessary. And I would say government, the media, the the welfare association, the socially minded organizations and individuals, we have all a collective responsibility in ensuring that prejudice does not hold. You won't believe that the media coverage is so distressing. When I look at it, 200 new COVID cases or something, and it's likely that the government will lock down Perumbakkam. But if you read between the lines, there is not even one case in Perumbakkam. It's just an apprehension, which that the reporter at Times of India or someone just. So when I'm everyone is not you and me. Everyone is an ordinary citizen. They look at the paper, they see that, and it sets in their brain. Now I am saying that there needs to be a dialogue with everyone. And this is where media, not just the poor reporter, but we in decision making, the media houses, the government, and all these people have a role to play. Even the cities, as they are designed in a very casteist and a very clannish way. How are we going to do a change? Today we read about in a village how a girl in Hathras is treated, how she was raped, how she was murdered, what happened to her. And we say, oh, that is a medieval issue. The way they're behaving is medieval. I said, no, I don't think casteism is medieval. It is actually there, present. It has been metamorphosed into our cities. We need to actually recognize these things. We need to change ourselves. We need to learn from other countries, other movements, other situations. And we must welcome change.
On that pretty persuasive note, I hope that a lot of people that are watching this will come to understand about your work and about what they can do as a citizen in enabling this really difficult transition period to be as smooth as possible. I really, really thank you so much for your valuable time, and I wish Pentaralagal Sangam and all the wonderful women, the brilliant workers with you, somehow get past this difficult time and get back to their normal, cheerful self very soon. Thank you, Sujata. Thank you.
Thank you, Vaishnavi. Lovely talking.